This is a great time to have a conversation about BenQ Pro Display Lineup and compare them. Primarily, we're going to be looking at the SW and the PD line. We're going to talk about the group of creative that these displays were made for, the unique features that come with each of the lineup, if you choose one or the other, what you may be gaining from each of these lineup, and also, most importantly, how does this fit into your workflow in general as a creative. So let's find out together. I'm Art and ArtIsRight. Before we start, subscribe if you're new and hit on the bell icon so you'll be notified every time I upload cool new videos like this. Both of these display lineup have been around for some time and they have a history and lineage to them. As technology improves over time, BenQ have incorporated these technologies into the current display lineup. What we're going to do is focus our conversation on the display that have been released in the past 2 years. This way we can get a better gauge on the current technologies that are in these display and also project a little bit better too as far as where these lineup are going to go into the future. Before we can do that, we need to really find out first who BenQ made these display for. So let's start out with the SW line. The SW line has always been known as the photographer display, and that is because the entire lineup has the hardware calibration capability. If you want the best color possible from any BenQ display, the SW lineup is definitely the one to consider. It's really designed so that photographers can really adjust their work and do color correction on work with extreme accuracy. This is going to benefit you in print, in uploading the work for web, or any type of workflow that you do with photography. With the latest BenQ SW models, they have also incorporated a few video-centric features as well, such as different HDR format support and native refresh rate that is other than 60 Hz. If you're doing color-critical post-production workflow, the SW display, especially the more recent release model, are definitely the one to consider here. Let's move over to the PD line. It's really created for designers, hence the name, BIT Pro Design. If you design for print, for web, for mobile, this is definitely going to be the display for you. If you do any CAD/CAM 3D modeling work, it also has a CAD/CAM mode which is designed to enhance wireframing. Combine this with Gamut Duo, you can split the display right in half from the one single input source, so that one side you're running in CAD/CAM mode so you can see the wireframe much easier, and on the other side you can see the rendition in the proper color mode right away, such as sRGB. This way this is going to save you a lot of time from switching between different color modes and switching back into CAD/CAM color mode. If you're an animator, many times when you animate, it's really hard to see the shadow detail. This panel itself on the PD line has an animation color mode. The animation color mode has 10 different levels that you can go in and dial the shadow detail up so that you can animate the dark details better and easier, all the while retaining the same dark shadow details in your original file so you don't have to adjust that at all, saving you a lot of time. Another group of creative that BenQ have also incorporated into the PD lineup is content creators. So for example, if you create YouTube videos, this is definitely the display that you want to consider. Now, some of the questions that I'm getting about the PD line in general is that, can I use the PD line to do photography editing? Yes, you can. However, there are certain color modes and color capabilities with regard to Gamut that's not really available in the PD line, and I'll cover that later on in this video. But definitely though, if you want to use the PD lineup to do color correction for photography, it definitely could be done too. And with a better understanding of who BenQ made these display for, let's talk about the similarities between them. Being that they both sit at the very top of the Pro Display lineup, you're always going to be guaranteed that you're going to get the best panel from BenQ inside these displays. All the SW displays and majority of the PD displays are 10-bit panel done via an 8-bit plus FRC. This is guaranteeing that you're always going to be seeing billions of colors at any given time. If you're worrying about eye fatigue from FRC or frame rate control, well, you don't really have to worry about much there because majority of the display also incorporate BenQ EyeCare technology, which helps reduce flickering and eye fatigue that could come from this. In addition, all these panels are going to be IPS LED backlight. There are two benefits that you're going to gain from having an IPS panel. The first one is that you're going to get really great colors from the panel itself, so regardless of the SW or the PD line display that you choose, the colors are going to be amazing. The other thing is the angle view. Having an IPS panel, which stands for in-plane switching, allows the person who's standing right in the middle, or even if it's just yourself who moved to the side, you're going to see the exact same color as if you're standing right in front of the display. This is really great if you're in an individual space, but it's also really awesome too if you're in a collaborative space where people have to gather around the display. This is definitely going to eliminate the conversation of, well, the color's a little bit off, right, from the person standing on the side. This is definitely a good display to definitely consider there. And when you choose these displays, well, you're always going to get an IPS, and that's something great about BenQ Pro Display Lineup that you have. And with the recently released model for both the SW and the PD line, BenQ have also incorporated a uniformity technology in there as well. What they have done at the factory is divide the display into multiple different grids, do a calibration on those grids individually, and store the data in the display itself. This way, when you open the display up from the box, you're going to get a uniform color pretty much with any color mode that you choose to run your display in. Another byproduct of this uniformity as well is that there's also less backlight bleeding from this display panel. Considering that this is an IPS, the amount of backlight bleeding that BenQ was able to reduce with their new uniformity technology is really amazing and is a welcome feature. Now let's talk about the differences. This is going to be a brief conversation about hardware versus software calibration. So the very top is the hardware calibration capability, which is built into all of the BenQ SW display. Essentially what that means is that when you do a calibration on this display, the display itself has a chip, and on that chip there is a 3D lookup table. When you use the right software such as Palette Master Element that has been developed by BenQ, or if your SW display is capable of using third-party software such as CalMan, what you're going to do there is doing an adjustment on the actual 3D lookup table. So you're going to get a much better accurate color that way, because even though these programs are going to produce an ICC profile, it's not really going to change or remap any color output that's coming out from your video card. Essentially, it's like shooting RAW and all the color adjustment is being done in, with a computer in Lightroom or something like that. So think of your display as, for example, Lightroom doing all the color adjustment, where all the data is retained coming out from the video card. On the PD display itself, this is a software calibrated display. So what that means is you're going to have to use the software that comes with your calibration device. If you have an X-Rite device, you'll be using either i1 Profiler or i1 Studio, depending on the device that you have. If you have a Data Color Spider device, you'll be using the appropriate Spider version software that corresponds to the device that you have to run the calibration on this. The difference is that the ICC profile that's produced by these software are going to remap the color output coming from your video card so that they match closely with the reference color. One thing to remember too when you're calibrating these displays is that you want to choose the color gamut that you want to calibrate the display in before you run the calibration. This means going in there and choosing the color mode that you want to run the calibration in. Another thing that we have to remember about the differences between a software versus hardware calibrated display beyond just RAW versus JPEG, for instance, is also the color gamut in general. On these hardware calibrated display, you have two advantages. Number one being a wider color gamut coverage. For example, all the SW display can cover 99% Adobe RGB. Whereas on the PD line, there's only one model in the PD lineup that can cover 99% Adobe RGB. All the other ones are going to be able to do about 80% Adobe RGB or so. Both of them are going to have really amazing sRGB and Rec 709 coverage. However, when it comes to Adobe RGB, you're really not going to get that so much. The other thing that we have to remember as well is that on a hardware calibrated display, we can really go in and run a hardware calibration and change the color gamut of the display to correspond to the gamut that we want. On the software calibrated display, you're pretty much just stuck with the color mode that is built in from the factory, so you really can't go in there and change the color gamut beyond what is available on the display itself. And speaking of color gamut, both the SW and the PD are going to be able to show 90+% P3 color space. This is both display P3 and DCI P3. Depending on the model you look at, the percent coverage of these P3 color space will vary. All of these displays, being that they're part of BenQ Pro Display Lineup, they have been pre-calibrated from the factory and they come with their own individual calibration report. The SW calibration report is going to be much thorough because it is a much more stringent panel, whereas the PD calibration report is going to show less information than the SW. Nonetheless, it's going to show you a lot of information about the panel, including the delta E coverage on the panel itself too. So you're always going to get a really great delta E guarantee from both of these displays. On the SW line, BenQ guarantees that you're always going to get a delta E value of less than 2 from the SW. When it comes to the PD line, you're going to get a display that has a delta E value of less than 3. And if you're worried about the delta E value difference between 2 and 3, I wouldn't say you have to really worry about that too much, because at delta E of 2, you may start to see the color differences, but those colors have to be right next to each other. At 3, again, you can start to see the differences, but the colors still have to be next to each other in order for you to really make the differences out. So either delta E value of 2 or 3, you're going to get really great result out of these panels. And most of the time, when I open these panel up and read its own individual calibration report, I'm able to get a delta E value of 1 point something on most of these panels. So they've been calibrated really well and very stringently from the factory floor already. And speaking about the differences, we have to talk about the color mode on these two displays, the SW and the PD. There are a few common ones such as sRGB Rec 709, Display P3, DCI P3, and also BenQ very own MBook color mode. MBook is included in majority of the recently released BenQ SW and PD display and is designed to match that of an uncalibrated Apple built-in display. This would be the display inside a MacBook, MacBook Pro, or iMac Pro for that matter, and the match is really amazing. On the SW display though, there are some color modes that are dedicated specifically towards the SW, for example, Adobe RGB color mode. Because all the SW display can show 99% Adobe RGB, well, BenQ have calibrated that color mode from the factory and you can choose to use that color mode if you want to. In addition, it also has a few other color modes too that are specific to the SW, such as the black and white color mode. The black and white is really awesome because if you try to turn your image into black and white in an image editing program, you may notice that sometimes the dark areas, especially the black, is going slightly green. With the advanced black and white mode on these SW display, it turns the display entirely into black and white, including all the graphical user interface, so you can preview what your image is going to look like in black and white without any color influence whatsoever. And lastly, there is a new color mode that is released with the latest BenQ SW display, and that is called Paper Color Sync. With Paper Color Sync, what BenQ have done is match the display white point so that it closely matches with the white point on the paper that you're printing out. This is a feature designed for our beginners and intermediary photographers who want to start to dabble into printing. It will give you an opportunity to immerse yourself in the printing world right away without having to worry too much about the color differences between your display and what's coming out on the print. Now moving over to the PD line, there are certain color modes that are PD specific. For example, a low blue light mode. So if you want to work in a low blue light output, that will be the mode you want to choose. CAD Cam will be another color mode that is PD specific because it's really designed to enhance wireframe, but it's not really built into the SW display. And the last mode I want to mention here is the animation, where you can really go in and enhance the animation shadow detail. This is again another color mode that's not in the SW display. So depending on the creative discipline that you are or that you dabble in, you may want to choose one of these displays depending on what you do. And in speaking of color mode, we have to talk about Gamut Duo. Gamut Duo is BenQ's specific feature that allows you to see two different color gamut on the display at any given time. The way how it's being implemented on the SW display, you can do it in two different ways. You can run it as a picture-in-picture or a picture-by-picture. So in a picture-in-picture, you will see another frame of the same input source or a different input source just overlaying on your video source, and that will allow you to view two different color sources at any given time. You can also do it as a picture-by-picture. However, there is really no way to divide the display in half so that half of it is one color mode and the other half is the other color mode. This is something that you can do on a PD line display, and is a feature that's designed specifically for the CAD CAM animation workflow. So you can view the enhanced wireframe, while the other half you can really view the 3D rendering in the proper color space right away. Now let's talk about HDR. All these recent release displays have support for HDR10 format as a standard. The peak brightness for each of these displays would vary depending on the model that you're looking at. On the SW side, the latest flagship SW321C, BenQ have also added another HDR format to that display as well. That is HLG Hybrid Log Gamma in addition to HDR10. This is really pivoting the creative group of the SW display from just photography into color critical post-production workflow as well. In addition, the SW270C and the SW321C has support for native refresh rate other than 60 Hz. For example, you can set the display to 24, 25, 30, 50, or 60 Hz, depending on the frame rate of the footage that you're bringing in. This way you can play back the footage at its native cadence without any pull down. Next up is certification. All the SW display, including majority of the PD line display, are CalMan verified. This way, if you're trying to use the display for video production workflow or color grading, it's going to be really great for this type of workflow in general. All of BenQ SW and PD line displays are Pantone validated. This means that you can really match the colors on the display to a Pantone chart without any problems at all. So these are going to be really great displays that you can use for printing. In addition, there are two more certifications I want to mention. One of them is Technicolor. Some of the older SW displays in the lineup will have Technicolor certification, and a newer one does not have that anymore. That is not because the newer one doesn't qualify for it, but it's because Technicolor stopped certifying display, and that's also the reason why we have a CalMan certification instead now. The other thing too is also VESA HDR standard. For example, the latest PD 3420Q also happens to have a VESA HDR 400 certification as well. This would depend on the display that you're looking at and whether it meets the VESA standard for the HDR certification or not. However, this is the model that does have that. We're now approaching the latter part of this comparison, and what I want to cover next is the industrial design. I wouldn't say one is necessarily better than the other, but what I will say is this. The PD line display is much catchier than the SW line, that is for sure. It's really nice, clean, thin, sleek line. It's really designed to match that of an Apple product. So if you have an Apple product, you set it right next to it, it just blends in right away. Really clean line all throughout, pretty much very minimalistic. On the SW display, you have a lot of gray there. And I wouldn't say gray is a bad thing, because if you really think about this from a color critical production workflow, you want the minimum bias around the display. So when you're looking at gray, you're looking at a neutral color. You're not looking at anything shiny. You're not looking at any distraction at all. You can really be immersed in the picture that you're looking at. And that's something that is really great about the SW display line that I think a lot of people tend to overlook and think that it's not quite as flashy as the other display line. The thing is this. It's great color. It's not really designed to be flashy in general. It's designed to minimize any distraction. And that's the whole philosophy of the SW display line. This being said, we also have to talk about the things that comes with the display lineup itself. For example, part of the ergonomic of the SW display is that all of them will come with a shading hood right out of the box with a felt lining on the inside. This way you have no distraction from any of the lighting in the environment whatsoever. This is something different though on the PD line display, where the PD line is not really designed to accommodate a hood. It's not really designed for that type of workflow. So we're talking about a different type of workflow and different type of creative in general. By the way, one more thing I want to mention is that the only SW display that does not ship standard with the shading hood is the SW240. That is the 24-inch model. Next up is the Hotkey Puck. All the latest PD and SW display ships with the Hotkey Puck Gen 2. For example, all the SW display beside the SW240 all ship with a Hotkey Puck right from the beginning, where the PD line displays, BenQ have just slowly started incorporating the Hotkey Puck into the display itself with the Gen 2 on these modern design ones. So that's something to think about there. But if you're looking at a latest display, you're always going to get the Hotkey Puck from BenQ, which is really awesome. Another thing that I want to mention about the SW line industrial design in general is that if you constantly take your display on set or reset up the display like I do, the SW display is actually a little bit easier to handle and hold. That is because on the back of the display itself, part of a stand, there is a handle. You can grab the display and go. It makes it really easy to move the display around to take it on location, whereas the PD display, there's really no handle there. So it's just kind of a little bit difficult to move it around. It's not a bad thing, because majority of us would buy the display, set it in one location and just leave it there. However, like I said, if you're like me and you constantly move the display around, the SW is better because the ergonomic of that handle is really a game changer. And one last thing about that I want to mention too is that on the SW display, we're talking about a really, really sturdy display where everything is really tight tolerances. When you push it down, you have to intentionally put it down. When you rotate the display, you have to intentionally go in and rotate. There's pretty much almost very little wobbling going on at all. On the PD lineup, I think that the springs and the mechanism are not quite as tight in, and that is the industrial design itself. It's not loose by any means. It's not like you're going to get a bad display that's constantly going to wobble or anything like that, but it's actually much looser than the SW display line. This is from years of using these two Pro Display Lineup, and I want to share that experience with you. Last in this comparison is the connectivity. I'm going to focus on displays that have been released from both of these lineup in the past 2 years. This way we're talking about the current port configuration. Both of these lineup generally include two HDMI 2.0, one DisplayPort 1.4, and let's first focus on the SW display with regards to USB. All of the SW displays, especially the recently released one that has a C moniker in the name, for example, the SW270C and the SW321C, incorporates a USB Type-C that has 60-watt power delivery. On the PD side of things, we have a mixture of USB Type-C and Thunderbolt depending on the model that you're looking at. And I'm talking about the recently released model with this new industrial design. So for instance, on the PD2720U and the PD3220U, BenQ have chosen to incorporate Thunderbolt 3 technology into those displays. The great thing about that is that the power delivery for those displays is 85 watt instead of 60, such as the one that's built in with the USB Type-C. And the other thing is that both of those models can do daisy chaining, so you can daisy chain another 4K display right onto those two BenQ PD displays. Now, we look at the most current release of the PD lineup, the PD3420Q, which is the one that I have here. For this model, BenQ have chosen to go back and use USB Type-C with 60 watt of power delivery. This is, by the way, USB Type-C. It is actually 3.1 Gen 1, so it is a really fast USB Type-C with the latest generation, but nonetheless, you can't do daisy chaining on them. And also the power delivery is now 60 watt, very similar to the SW display. So depending on the model that you're looking at, I would just think about the power delivery a little bit, especially if you're using a laptop product. Now, one thing that I want to clear up about the power delivery is that even though if you have a display such as this SW270C or the PD3420Q that can only do 60 watt power delivery on USB Type-C, it will still power a 16-inch MacBook Pro just fine without any issues. The thing though is that if you're running the laptop under heavy load, it's just really going to power the laptop and not charge the battery. And if it charges the battery, it may charge it slightly slower than a higher power output or a higher power delivery one. But otherwise, you're going to be good in using the display along with the laptop and portable device that you have. This said, I hope that you find this comparison helpful and also guide your decision in choosing the best BenQ Pro line display that will fit in your workflow. If you have any questions about this, leave them in the comment section below. Give this video a like, subscribe if you're new, hit on the bell to be notified every time I upload cool new contents like this. And until next time, ArtIsRight. For those of you who have watched this to the end, I want to say happy holidays to all of you and happy new year. This is pretty much released right in between Christmas and New Year, and I want to have the opportunity to say that to all of you. Thank you so much for watching, for subscribing to my channel and everything. And one more thing I want to mention too is that in the previous video that I have released, the PD3420Q versus the PD3220U, I talk about there is a height difference between that 32-inch versus the 34-inch one. Well, guess what? If you have a 27-inch display, the height is pretty much perfect between these two models. This is the SW270C and the PD3420Q. As you can kind of see there, the height matches perfectly between these two displays. So if you want to run this display in a dual format and you want everything to be even, 27-inch BenQ is definitely the way to go, especially the one with, the infinity edge on 3 sides. That would be a really awesome choice that you can choose from.